An orphaned, mangy German shepherd puppy cried out in the darkness, his tiny body trembling with hunger and fear. No mother, no warmth, just cold silence and pain. People passed by, but no one stopped until one man did. What followed was a journey of tears, healing, and love that would break hearts and inspire hope forever. If you're an animal lover, hit subscribe for more stories like this. It's completely free, and it inspires us to keep telling the ones that truly matter. The night was colder than most in the small town, the kind of cold that sank into bones and made every shadow feel heavier. The streets were quiet except for the occasional hum of a passing car, headlights cutting briefly through the darkness before vanishing again. It was in one of those forgotten back alleys, wedged between two crumbling brick buildings, that the sound first came, a thin, broken cry. At first, it was faint, almost like the wind had shifted strangely through a drainpipe. But then it came again, a whimper, a soft, pitiful sound that carried all the weight of desperation. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. Most people would have walked by with their heads buried in scarves, thinking only of their own warmth. But fate has a way of ensuring the right ears hear cries like that. Mark was heading home from his late shift at the auto shop, his hands still smelling faintly of oil. His jacket was zipped high, his shoulders hunched against the chill. He almost didn't stop. He was tired, his muscles ached, and all he wanted was his bed. But then that sound cut through the night again, sharper this time, almost frantic. Something about it stopped him in his tracks. He turned, squinting into the dim alley. Trash cans leaned against the wall, cardboard boxes scattered like abandoned thoughts. And then, beneath a broken piece of wooden pallet, he saw movement. A small shape. Trembling. Mark crouched low, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Hey there, what's this?" His voice was gentle, though he wasn't sure who or what he was speaking to. As his eyes adjusted, the sight struck him harder than he expected. A puppy. But not the kind anyone would have called cute at first glance. She was rail-thin, every rib pressing sharply against dull, patchy fur. Large ears drooped heavily, crusted with dirt. Her skin was mottled with raw patches, angry with mange. Her eyes, though, that's what stopped him. Wide, wet, shining with a mix of fear and pleading. Eyes that begged for something, anything, warmth, kindness, survival. She whimpered again when he moved closer, dragging herself backward until her frail body hit the wall. She tried to make herself small, but there was nowhere left to hide. The sound she made wasn't a bark, wasn't even a proper growl. It was the sound of an animal who had already learned the world was cruel, but still, against all odds, hoped it might not always be. Mark's chest tightened. He had seen his share of strays before, but something about this one hit differently. Maybe it was the way she looked too young to have already been through so much. Maybe it was the way her body shook violently, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion, as if she had been crying out for hours and no one had come. He glanced around the alley. No mother dog. No siblings. Just a pile of damp rags and scraps where she must have been trying to sleep. Alone. Abandoned. Orphaned. Mark slowly extended his hand, palm open. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The pup flinched, pressing herself tighter against the wall. Her body seemed to curl inward, expecting pain. Mark froze, letting his hand rest still on the ground, giving her time. He knew trust couldn't be forced. Minutes passed, the only sound the soft drip of water from a rusted pipe overhead. Finally, the pup's nose twitched. Hunger and desperation warred with fear. Inch by inch, she leaned forward, sniffing at the air between them. "You're starving, huh?" Mark whispered. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the half sandwich he hadn't eaten from lunch. He tore off a piece of bread and laid it on the ground between them. Her eyes darted from the food to his face, uncertain. But hunger won. Slowly, shakily, she stretched her neck forward and snatched the morsel, retreating instantly to her corner. She chewed in tiny, desperate motions, swallowing like each bite might be stolen away. Mark set another piece down, closer this time. And another. Until finally, her nose brushed against his fingers. Her tiny tongue licked the crumbs from his skin before she realized what she had done. She froze, eyes wide, waiting for a blow that never came. Instead, Mark's voice came again, softer than before. "Good girl, you're safe." When he finally moved his hand to touch her, she didn't pull away. His fingertips brushed against the edge of her ear, rough with scabs, and she whimpered, but didn't run. It was the smallest surrender, but enough to make Mark's throat tighten. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't leave her here. Not like this. Not when the night was only getting colder, and her body was already too weak to fight another battle alone. Mark slid off his jacket, wrapping it carefully around the trembling bundle. She didn't resist, just gave a soft cry, curling instinctively into the warmth. As he lifted her, her tiny body pressed into his chest, and for the first time that night, her whimpers quieted. Walking out of the alley, Mark glanced down at the fragile life in his arms. He didn't know her story yet, where she had come from, how long she had been alone. But he knew one thing: her fight wasn't over. Not if he had anything to say about it. And so, the orphaned, mangy German Shepherd puppy who had cried out into the darkness finally had someone listening. Someone who wasn't going to turn away. Someone who just might change everything. Rick named the puppy Luna, a name he whispered softly on the drive home, unsure if she even registered it, but needing to give her something other than the shadow of abandonment. She sat curled in a blanket on the passenger seat, her eyes blinking weakly in the dim glow of the dashboard. Rick drove slower than usual, as if any bump might shatter her already fragile body. His house was quiet, too quiet. The walls had echoed only with his footsteps for months now. When his old German shepherd, Max, had passed away, Rick swore he couldn't go through that kind of loss again. He had even packed away Max's toys, leaving the living room bare. But now, as he carried Luna inside, he felt a spark stir in the emptiness. He placed her gently on the couch, wrapped in the blanket, then went to fetch the supplies the vet had given him. Antibiotics, medicated shampoo, instructions scribbled on a notepad. Feed small amounts every few hours. Keep her warm. Avoid stress. Rick read it twice, as if it were a sacred text. Luna let out a faint whimper. Rick knelt beside her, his rough hands trembling as he stroked her head. She flinched at first, her body conditioned to recoil. That single, instinctive flinch cut through Rick's chest. What had the world done to her? He whispered again, "It's okay, Luna. No one's going to hurt you here." The first night was endless. Rick sat on the floor by the couch, dozing in snatches, waking at every small sound she made. He offered her tiny spoonfuls of warm food, sometimes coaxing her for 10 minutes just to take a single bite. When she finally licked his fingers clean, he felt his throat tighten with something close to relief and grief all at once. By morning, the routine began. Medicated baths that left Luna shivering, towel rubs to coax warmth back into her skin, and constant reminders of gentleness. Rick discovered she had pressure sores on her legs from lying too long on concrete. He patted her bedding with old shirts of his own, figuring his scent might comfort her. Strangely, she seemed calmer when lying on them. Days blurred into weeks. Luna began standing a little steadier, though her ribs still jutted out sharply. Her eyes, once clouded with pain, started to hold flickers of curiosity. She followed Rick's movements with hesitant attention, as if studying whether he truly meant the kindness he offered. Trust didn't bloom overnight. It crept in slowly, like sunlight finding its way through storm clouds. One evening, Rick sat with his dinner at the kitchen table, listening to the quiet hum of the heater. He felt a light pressure against his leg. Looking down, he found Luna had gathered the courage to walk over and rest her bony frame against him. She didn't ask for food. She just stood there, leaning. Rick set his fork down, his vision blurring. He placed a hand gently on her head. "Good girl, Luna," he whispered, voice breaking. "Good girl." From that night forward, something shifted. Luna began seeking him out, tiny steps, then bigger ones. She would hobble after him from room to room, collapsing in awkward heaps near his feet. Every time she moved, Rick saw both pain and determination etched into her fragile body. She had chosen him. Despite all the cruelty she had endured, she had chosen to believe in him. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights, she woke with sharp cries, thrashing as if invisible hands still clutched her. Rick would rush to her side, wrapping his arms around her until she quieted, whispering assurances into the dark. "You're safe, Luna. No one's going to take you away again." His own nightmares of losing Max mingled with hers, binding them in silent solidarity. Then came the first breakthrough, small but monumental. Rick was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting through Luna's meds, when he felt a gentle weight on his knee. Luna, trembling, had placed her paw there. Not demanding, not fearful, just reaching out. Rick froze, afraid any movement would break the fragile moment. Then, slowly, he covered her paw with his hand. For the first time since Max, he smiled without forcing it. Rick realized he had started talking to Luna more than to anyone else. He told her about his day, about the quiet ache of the house, about the memories of Max that still hovered like ghosts. She would tilt her head, ears twitching, as if absorbing every word. "You know," he said one night, "Max would have liked you. He always looked out for the smaller ones." The bond grew, but so did the weight of responsibility. Every day, he feared some hidden complication would undo her progress. He checked her breathing in the middle of the night, hovering with worry. Yet with each passing week, her coat began to show signs of renewal. Patches of soft fur sprouted where bare skin had once been. Her eyes, those eyes, shone brighter, carrying not just survival, but the faint beginnings of hope. Still, Rick knew scars ran deeper than the skin. Luna, startled at sudden noises, froze when strangers passed the gate. And though she leaned into Rick's touch now, she never let herself fall fully asleep beside him. Trust was growing, but it was still fragile, like glass that could crack with the wrong pressure. And then came the day that tested it. Rick was in the yard with Luna, letting her sniff at the grass, when a car backfired down the street. The sound was sharp, violent. Luna collapsed instantly, her body cowering into the dirt, eyes wide with terror. Rick dropped to his knees, pulling her close. "It's okay, Luna. It's just a car," he murmured, stroking her trembling frame. But in her eyes, Rick saw more than fear. He saw memories. Shadows of something darker. Something she wasn't ready to share, but couldn't hide either. Rick held her until the shaking eased. And in that moment, he understood. This wasn't just about saving her life. It was about giving her back the pieces of her soul that the world had tried to take. And he vowed, silently but fiercely, that he would not fail her. The days that followed were an exhausting blur of syringes, medicine, feeding schedules, and whispered encouragements. Rick barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he worried he'd wake to find Luna gone. He moved a small cot into the spare room so he could be beside her kennel, waking at the faintest rustle or whimper. The infection was cruel. It fought back even against antibiotics. Her little body would tremble in fever, eyes glazed and glassy, and Rick would press a cool, damp cloth against her head, murmuring nonsense just so she wouldn't feel alone. "Easy, baby. I've got you. You're not alone anymore." There were setbacks, nights when she refused to eat, mornings when she lay so still Rick panicked, fearing she had slipped away. But every time, just when he felt despair crushing him, she'd stir, lifting her head with those two big ears and blinking at him with fragile determination. It was as if she wanted him to know she was still fighting. Her progress was measured in tiny victories. A few laps of water from the bowl. A tentative step outside into the grass, where the sunlight warmed her matted coat. A faint thump of her tail the first time Rick whispered her name. Each moment felt monumental, like watching a wilted plant stretch toward light after a storm. Neighbors began to notice. They saw Rick, once the quiet man who kept to himself, carrying the frail puppy wrapped in a blanket in his arms like she was a treasure. They'd ask how she was doing, offer old towels, bags of kibble, or just words of encouragement. Some shook their heads, saying it was hopeless, that the pup was too far gone. Rick ignored them. He had lived through his own darkness. He refused to give up on hers. Luna began to change. Her skin, though still raw in places, slowly healed. The mangy patches gave way to soft tufts of fur. Her ribs, once sharp ridges, became less visible as her appetite grew. Rick discovered she loved chicken broth, and he'd cook it fresh, savoring the rare moments when she would eat eagerly. But the biggest change wasn't physical, It was in her eyes. Where once there had only been dull resignation, now flickered a fragile spark of trust. She would lift her gaze to him as though asking, "Can I really believe in this? In you?" Rick knew that trust wasn't given, it was earned. So he showed up, every day, every night, no matter how tired or broken he felt. When she was too weak to stand, he carried her. When she was frightened of the outdoors, he sat in the yard for hours until she dared to take a step. When nightmares jolted her awake, he reached into her kennel, letting her press her frail head against his palm until she settled. One rainy afternoon, something remarkable happened. Rick sat on the floor beside her bed, repairing an old watch he hadn't touched in years. Luna crawled forward, slow, shaky, but determined. She pressed her muzzle against his leg, gave the smallest sigh, and rested there. Rick froze, the watch slipping from his hands. His throat tightened. He hadn't realized how much he needed this. Her choice, her trust, her quiet declaration, "You are my safe place." For the first time in years, tears slipped down his face, and he didn't hide them. He whispered, "Thank you, little one, for believing in me." From that day on, Luna's healing quickened. She followed Rick with her eyes, then her paws, padding softly after him from room to room. She wagged her tail more. She tried to play, clumsily batting at his shoelace with a paw too large for her frail body. And one night, when Rick returned from work later than usual, she let out the faintest whine, anxious, yearning, afraid of being left. Rick knelt beside her, stroking her gently. "I'm here. I'll always be here." In her silent, fragile way, Luna was mending not just her own wounds, but Rick's as well. She was teaching him that love, once lost, could still be found. The first few days were the hardest. The little German shepherd puppy, now called Hope, spent most of her time curled in the corner of Rick's spare bedroom. Though he had cleaned her, treated her wounds with the vet's guidance, and given her food and water, the trauma she carried weighed heavy on her tiny frame. Every movement, every sound seemed to startle her. She would jerk her head up, eyes wide, expecting harm. Rick understood. He had known fear himself. Nights alone in his truck cab, struggling to keep warm with nothing but thin blankets during his darker years. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible. He never forced her. Instead, he let her set the pace. Each morning, he left her food in a shallow dish and sat across the room, quietly sipping his coffee. He spoke softly, not with coaxing words, but gentle narrations of his day. "Gotta check the fence later, Hope," he would murmur, his voice steady, calm. "Maybe plant some tomatoes if the frost is really gone. We'll see." She didn't understand his words, but the tone, low, patient, kind, soothed her. Slowly, something shifted. On the fourth night, as Rick dozed off on the couch, he felt a faint pressure near his feet. Opening one eye, he saw Hope cautiously climbing up, trembling, curling into the crook of his leg. She didn't sleep, not really. Her eyes flicked open at every sound, but she stayed. For Rick, that was the first miracle. By the end of the week, Hope began to explore the house. She padded softly across the kitchen, sniffing table legs, cautiously peering into the hallway. She had never known freedom inside walls that meant safety instead of entrapment. Each discovery, a ball left in the corner, sunlight pooling on the floor, even the hum of the refrigerator, was met with hesitant curiosity. But progress was not linear. One afternoon, when Rick reached out too quickly to move a chair, Hope yelped and bolted under the bed, her frail body shaking violently. Rick froze, guilt washing over him. He crouched low and spoke quietly. "No one's gonna hurt you anymore, little one. Not ever again." It took hours for her to emerge. When she finally did, her tail tucked tightly, Rick didn't reach for her. He let her walk past him, making her own choice. Trust, he knew, was not something you demanded. It was a gift, earned piece by piece. The next hurdle was the outside world. The vet had suggested gentle walks to help build strength, but the first time Rick clipped the leash to Hope's new soft harness, she froze. Her legs locked, and she refused to move. Rick didn't drag her. Instead, he sat in the grass with her, letting the sun warm them both. Birds sang in the trees overhead, the breeze carrying the scent of blooming lilacs. Slowly, Hope lowered herself beside him, pressing her side into his thigh. She wasn't ready to walk, but she wanted to be near him. That was enough. Over time, she began to take cautious steps. At first, only a few feet before retreating. Then, a little further. Each small victory was celebrated by Rick with a gentle smile and quiet praise. "That's my girl," he'd whisper. Neighbors started to notice. Rick had lived on this street for nearly a decade, but people had rarely seen him so animated. Now, they watched from their porches as the ragged puppy slowly learned to walk beside him. Some offered words of encouragement. Others simply smiled, touched by the sight of the hardened man and the fragile pup leaning on one another. At night, Hope's nightmares remained. She would whimper in her sleep, paws twitching, body rigid. Rick would wake, heart aching, and gently stroke her back. "You're safe now," he'd murmur again and again until her breathing steadied. Healing was slow. It wasn't a straight line. But little by little, the mangy, broken puppy began to transform. Her fur, once patchy and coarse, grew softer under Rick's careful grooming and the medicine the vet prescribed. Her eyes, once glazed with despair, now held a faint spark. She even began to wag her tail, tentatively at first, then with more certainty whenever Rick returned home from the store or work. But one evening, something happened that shook Rick to his core. He had just finished feeding Hope when he heard a noise outside, a heavy knock at the door. Rick rarely had visitors. With a furrowed brow, he opened it to find a man standing there, rough-looking, with cold eyes. "That's my dog," the stranger said flatly, pointing past Rick's shoulder. Hope, hearing the voice, whimpered and darted behind the couch, her body trembling uncontrollably. Rick's stomach twisted. Every instinct in him told him exactly who this man was. And just like that, the past Hope had tried so hard to escape was suddenly at their doorstep. The clinic's back room had grown quiet except for the faint hum of an old heater. Luna lay curled on the blanket Rick had brought, her chest rising and falling in the slow, labored rhythm of a dog still fighting for strength. Her fur was patchy, her skin still raw from the mange, but her eyes, they were clear now, bright enough to pierce Rick's heart every time they met his. Rick sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her paw. The days had blurred into nights, and the nights into days, but he didn't leave her side. He had carried her through the worst, and though the vets handled the medical care, he knew his presence mattered. She didn't cry anymore when left alone, not the way she had in the beginning. But when Rick was there, she sighed softly, like she finally felt safe. Dr. Myers entered quietly, holding a clipboard. "She's improving," he said in a low voice. "Not out of the woods yet, but her vitals are steady. She's responding better than we thought." Rick nodded, relief washing over him. "She wants to live," he whispered, glancing back at Luna. "She's tougher than anyone gave her credit for." Dr. Myers gave him a small smile. "She's lucky you found her when you did." Lucky. The word didn't feel right. Rick didn't think it was luck that had brought him down that road, that had made him stop when he heard her desperate cries. Something deeper had pushed him, maybe fate, maybe something beyond him. He only knew he couldn't imagine walking away from her now. That night, as the storm raged outside the clinic, Rick dozed in the chair with Luna's paw still in his hand. He dreamt of her not as she was now, weak, frail, fighting to survive, but as she could be, bounding through tall grass, her coat full and shining, her bark strong. It felt like a promise, a glimpse of the future if only they could hold on long enough. The next morning, Rick awoke to a surprising sound. A soft whine, not of pain, but of recognition. Luna was awake, her head lifted slightly. When she saw him stir, her tail tapped faintly against the blanket. It was the first time she had wagged it since he'd found her. Rick's throat tightened. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "That's my girl," he whispered. "You keep fighting. I'm right here." The vet team came and went, adjusting medications, cleaning her sores, checking her weight. But all Rick could see was that fragile flicker of spirit returning. Luna wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to trust life again. A few days later, when the clinic allowed it, Rick took her outside for the first time. She was still weak, her steps wobbly, but the moment her paws touched the grass, she froze, lifted her nose, and breathed in the crisp morning air. For a long moment, she simply stood there, eyes wide, tail trembling. Then she took a step, then another. Rick walked slowly beside her, careful not to push too hard. Every sound startled her, the chirp of a bird, the crunch of leaves, but she didn't collapse. She pressed closer to Rick, her thin frame brushing his leg, seeking reassurance. And he gave it freely, murmuring, "You're safe now. Nothing's going to hurt you again." That walk lasted only a few minutes before she grew tired, but it was enough to show Rick something important. She wasn't broken. She was healing. Back inside, Rick settled her again on the blanket. He rubbed her ears gently, his voice thick. "You're going to make it, Luna. And when you do, I promise you, life won't ever look like it did before. You'll know love. You'll know home." He realized then how deeply she had changed him. He'd gone out that night a man weighed down by old wounds, carrying guilt he never spoke of, loneliness he had accepted as permanent. But Luna had cracked open something inside him. In saving her, he was saving himself. The vet staff often found him late at night still sitting with her, telling her stories about his life, things he'd never said aloud to anyone. He spoke of the friends he'd lost, the choices he regretted, the dreams he had buried. And somehow, talking to her felt easier. She didn't judge, didn't turn away. She only listened, her dark eyes full of quiet understanding. As days passed, Luna's strength grew. Her fur began to regrow, soft tufts pushing through the rough patches. The sores started to heal, and the tremble in her legs faded little by little. She could walk longer, eat more, and even lift her head when someone new entered the room. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the windows in amber light, Rick opened the clinic door, and Luna surprised him. Instead of shrinking back as she once had, she stepped forward, tail wagging faintly, sniffing the air like she belonged. Rick crouched down, his eyes damp. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the real you coming out." It was then he knew her story wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about rebirth. And he would be there for every step of it, no matter how long it took. Luna's story had already touched the hearts of the community, but what happened next would carry her journey far beyond the small neighborhood where it began. Rick had not set out to become a storyteller or an advocate. He was just a man who had stumbled upon a tiny, broken creature crying for help. But life has a way of turning pain into purpose, and Luna's survival became more than just her own triumph. News of the mangy, orphaned German Shepherd puppy who had once been left to die traveled quickly. A neighbor who had helped carry blankets to Rick's porch shared Luna's photos on social media. At first, it was just a local post. "Look at what kindness can do." But within days, the pictures went viral. People from across the country sent messages of support, donations to cover her medical bills, and words of encouragement for Rick. The sight of Luna, once nothing but bones, scabs, and sadness, now slowly blooming into a vibrant, playful puppy became a symbol. For those who had lost hope, she was a reminder that even the most broken beings can find healing when shown love. For Rick, she became a constant source of strength, a living reminder that opening your heart, no matter how painful, could change everything. Luna herself seemed to sense her new role. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. The playful bounces of her paws as she chased a ball across Rick's yard, the way she pressed her head into his chest during quiet nights, the trust in her wide, gentle eyes, all of it carried a message: love heals. One afternoon, months after her rescue, Rick took Luna to the very place where he had first found her. The corner where her tiny body had curled in the dirt, waiting to be swallowed by silence. She stood there, tail wagging, fur now thick and glossy, her scars hidden beneath new life. Rick knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her back, and whispered, "You made it. You never gave up." It wasn't just about her anymore. People had written to Rick, telling him they had adopted dogs from shelters after hearing Luna's story. Some said they found comfort in her strength as they battled their own hardships. A woman recovering from illness told him she watched Luna's progress every day, finding the courage to fight her own battles. Luna, the puppy no one wanted, had become a light in the darkest of places. But behind every message and every cheer was a truth Rick never forgot. Luna's healing had also saved him. For years, Rick had carried a quiet grief, one he never shared with anyone. His wife had passed away, and in the silence of his home, he had closed himself off, choosing loneliness over the risk of more pain. But Luna broke through the walls he had built. Her cries for help had forced him to feel again, to love again, to hope again. That night, as Rick sat on his porch with Luna curled against his side, he thought back to the moment he first heard her faint whimpers. He realized that both of them had been crying for help in their own ways. And by answering her call, he had unknowingly answered his own. The story of Luna didn't end with survival. It grew into something larger, something eternal. Rick dedicated his days to helping other abandoned animals, using Luna's journey as proof of what compassion could accomplish. Together, they visited shelters, spoke to children about kindness, and inspired others to open their homes to the forgotten and unwanted. Still, at the heart of it all, it was simple: a man and his dog. Rick didn't need the world to know their names. All he needed was the sound of Luna's soft breathing as she slept beside him, safe and loved. Luna, the orphaned, mangy German shepherd puppy who once lay trembling and broken in the dirt, had become a radiant soul, a beacon of resilience. Her past would never define her, only the love she carried forward. And as the night sky stretched above them, filled with quiet stars, Rick whispered once more, "You'll never be alone again." For Luna had found her forever home, and in saving her, Rick had found his, too.